benefit of the recording, I welcome everybody along to the Saturday Morning Coffee Club.
Hello.
Just an opportunity for us to bring in guests from time to time and have a general conversation regarding whatever topic springs to mind, whatever we want to talk about. It's not trying to be too polished, it's not trying to be too serious, and at the same time I think we will cover a lot of serious projects. Now I just need to ask, am I loud enough? Because I've got the microphone slightly away from me. Danny, can you hear me fine, or could I do with being a bit
I
louder?
can hear you very clearly. I was about to ask you the
You're,
same for me.
Okay, yeah, no, you're really good, you're really good.
Good.
Pugs, were you wanting to say
Uh-huh.
something then, or no?
Sorry, I thought I didn't realise I was muted. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Is
um
that okay? Is
yeah,
that all right?
yeah, you're
I
fine.
haven't got titty mic.
No, it's okay. You're
Okay.
just a little. It's a obviously the sound of a muffled mic. Morning, Steve. You're right. Black wax. You on a journey? You're muted. I hope you're not driving.
Morning, Steve.
Okay.
I think the app keeps playing up on my phone.
He's muted. Everyone doesn't realise when they first join they're muted.
Can I unmute them? I wonder. No, people have to unmute themselves. What were you
Yeah, you
saying,
have to mute
Danny?
yourself.
Danny Wood.
The app keeps playing up on my phone, so I do apologise, but I am saying hello to you, honestly.
No worries, my friend. Just as long as I can hear, I know you can hear me. That's all good. Steve, you are muted. Just give me a nod your head. Let me know that you can hear us. Okay. Yeah. So Steve's there. All right. So we'll crack on. What we're going to do? It was just a sheer, as always, series of coincidences that brought Danny onto this morning's stream. Danny, I can't actually remember what it was now that you'd sent me the new album, and then I said,
Yep.
actually, Danny, coincidentally, I do remember I was thinking of bringing some people onto this new project that I'm doing. You've got a wealth of experience. Would you be interested in coming and talking to the crew? I think that was the long and short of it, right?
It was, and I think it was really interesting, the kind of the parallel really with the concept of the album and your mix session that you had done in the past, and I love the story because, you sent me to link to go and check it out. And the story was amazing. It's like this really kind of rich. I didn't realize that you've been writing, in terms of, putting words down onto paper. And I'm sure you've got, imagination. I know that, but it's more about I didn't know you as a writer. And so
Well,
here was this really, really big piece of storytelling. I
mhm.
thought that was great, amazing. And there is a parallel. I think yours is probably much more rooted in the dance floor, in terms of the language you were using, and in terms of the story was very specifically related to the kind of events that you and I have probably been through in our lives a few times. And I think the difference with my one is not so connected with that world through any of the language that's used, but it's more connected to that world through the music. So there are differences,
Mhm.
and it was really interesting. This kind of these interesting moments that you get where people are thinking of similar things, and there's this kind of this is where all the creativity comes out, doesn't it? Because where you get minds that meet, that's when sometimes the whole idea can get bigger and better and much more interesting, So it created an opportunity for me to come on. So I'm grateful, So thank you.
You're more than welcome, my friend. It's a pleasure to have you. No stranger to myself and a lot of the crew. Good morning, Simon. So let's roll back, and we're going to talk at length about your album, which was released yesterday. Let's roll it back to yourself and
Mm,
discuss how you got into the music game, because the whole point of what I would like to achieve from our conversation is to highlight your journey,
yeah,
covering almost 3 decades in the music game and the changes that you've seen along the way for
yeah.
better and for worse.
Yeah, yeah, no, there have been an incredible amount of changes. Really, if you want to rewind back, it goes back to the late 80s. And what happened there was that, I discovered, electronic, club music, underground music. And this was by chance. I was going to clubs where, everybody had to dress up smart and wear shirts, and you had Alexander O'Neill, Fake, and all this kind of stuff, which was kind of deemed as really probably peak time club music in those days. And my friend and I, we met a couple of girls that took us to our first underground thing, which was at the Astoria, which was a night called Sin, which was Nicky Holloway and Pete Tong. You know, it was their night that they put on. They would bring the American DJs over, and you know, I saw people like Frankie Knuckles, and you know, the huge list of, you know, very, very serious American DJs that came over to perform, and it was really transformative. You know, up until that point, I hadn't thought about music. I hadn't worked in music. I hadn't trained in music. I hadn't played any musical instruments. You know, so it was going to the clubs and living that life for a few years that all of a sudden kind of awoke ideas in my head, you know. So in some respects, it kind of opened up this box of madness in a way, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And before that, there was literally nothing in terms of any musical activity. I was involved in, you know, I studied art and design at school, so there was a certain creative aspect, but that was never manifesting into any kind of musical thing. So it was literally going out to the clubs, living that kind of life for a while, opened up something in my brain that didn't exist before. So literally was unlocked through all of that activity. And then it was a case of, well, what do I do with this? Because this was, I think probably about, say, 1990, 91, when this stuff started coming into my head. And in those days, if you wanted to record music, you'd have to go into a recording studio, right? You know, because to get the quality, you'd have to be able to use all this equipment, you know, the hardware, you know, samplers and synthesizers and a proper full mixer and all these other things which weren't available to me. So I remember saving up some money and going into a studio in Camden and putting down the first track, you know, and it was messy, you know. It was an idea that I'd put together with a friend. We cobbled together a couple of, you know, bits of gear. In those days, I was using I had a Commodore Amiga, you know. Do you remember those old computers? You know, so you had the typewriter keyboard, floppy disks on the side, and mainly it was for games. You know, it was like a games thing. People used to play games on the Commodore Amiga back in the day. It was a popular platform for that.
A bag of laughs if you needed to change the arrangements at any point.
Yeah, but I was able to extract my idea onto a MIDI file, right? So then I could take the MIDI file into the studio, and then the engineer, who was pretty much a kind of producer stroke engineer, he was doing all of the programming, getting everything sounding. So from my MIDI file that I'd created at home, he would then assist in making it sound bigger and richer and everything it needed to be. So that was the first thing. And funny enough, there's a reel of tape on the wall that you can see over there. That is literally the tape that ended from that very first session. So that's like a souvenir for me. You know, that's literally the tape, because we used to record onto a reel-to-reel tape. You know, so if you're recording vocals, there were no digital means of getting the vocals recorded into a system. You'd get a tape machine and the computer would synchronize with the tape. So it would go backwards and forwards, spinning forwards and backwards. So that was the very beginning. And then I kind of thought to myself, no, I'm a bit out of my depth here. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know. But I was really determined to learn more. So then I started trying to get into the publications, you know, Sound and Sound magazine and stuff like that. But really it was another language, you know, trying to understand what all of these, it felt like it was a very highbrow world, you know, people who are very versed in electronic engineering, you know, using lots of terminology that I didn't understand. So that was really challenging. So I would try to find out information, but the internet didn't exist, of course. There was no means of doing that. You wouldn't find any library books that would be covering this subject. So it was in those days, in the early 90s, this subject was really guarded. And so anybody that you met who had the knowledge didn't want to pass it on, because some respects, it's competition.
I was going to say, would you say it was actively guarded?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would meet different engineers and they would be guarded. They really would be. And in years following, what happened was I started getting a couple of bits at home, bits of technology secondhand. So in those days, I couldn't afford the equipment, so it would be a case of where can I find something cheap? We used to go to the local shops and see what we could find in some of the music stores that would be selling stuff secondhand. So I had a very primitive setup that gradually grew, and I did get into debt, borrowing money in order to get some of the gear, and then I was getting better quality demos, so these were cassette tapes that I would hand out, when I was going clubbing, so I would give them to people. And it turned out eventually that I got interest from a management company who were looking for new talent. And then they started, in essence, kind of investing in my work and getting me into studios and recording stuff, So we're talking about that kind of transitionary point, probably around the time of the first version of Spend the Night, which was about 93 or so. All right.
So you mentioned about some of the DJs when you went out to the clubs. More and more, you would start listening to other productions. Who would you say were your biggest influences in the early days?
Okay, so in the time when I was learning how to make and produce music, I was pretty much living at the Ministry. So I used to go mainly on the Saturday night, but then sometimes I go on the Friday night. So my strongest memories are of Rulin on the Saturday, which is probably a bit later, about 94 or so, but I was going earlier. And then also some of the tech stuff on the Friday. I can't remember what it was called, but there was another night which was techno. So between those two, I was absorbing a lot of influences. My biggest heroes back in those days were definitely, Kenny Dope, Louis Vega, Kerry Chandler, Todd Terry, even David Morales and, Frankie Knuckles. It's all the traditional, these guys. And there was a particular sound, particularly in the Ministry. Because you've been there so many times, of course, but when you're in that room at about, I don't know, say 3 or 4 a.m. when the system had warmed up, there was a magic in that room, in the box, and the sound and these. So when I was listening to music, I was breaking it down because the system was really good. The original system in the Ministry was one of the best systems that I've heard, because it came from the Richard Long components from the Paradise Garage, so some of those components were historic and they sounded incredible. And I was just trying to listen as much as I could, so I would be in there for 12 hours, I'd be there for the whole duration. And then, we would go on to places like the Elephant and Castle pub. And that's another story, because that's when the starting of the kind of UK spin on, the US sound started emerging, so that was that moment. Thankfully I was involved in being as a punter, nothing to do with being involved as a DJ or a producer on the scene, really, because I was, very, very small fry compared to everybody else. So for me, I was more of a punter in those days because I was very passionate about making music. So those guys are definitely a huge influence. And also the idea of, I'd be in the Ministry sometimes and I would hear a DJ play a dub that will have lots of space, so it could be you'd have a song where there might be just an a cappella and maybe some hi-hats, maybe a chord, and that's it. And that would go on for a while. So I got used to the idea of actually being in that space and absorbing that. So quite often, possibly one of the things that I do wrong these days is I do that again in contemporary terms. And I don't think everybody's got the patience for that so much anymore as listeners, so that they don't have that. Okay, if someone in a club now plays something maybe for 2 minutes, which is a pad and a vocal and hi-hats, they're going to kill the floor potentially. But I think in those days there was something about the audience, the timing, just right place, right time, that sort of thing worked really, really well. So we were there and we were happy to be there, and it really worked. So quite often I keep reflecting back to that, because when I make music, I'm always thinking back and reliving experiences. That's what I do. So I'll work late at night on the headphones. I can't do it in the day. I struggle because I need the dark and I need a few flashing lights here or there. I need that atmosphere because the music really is designed for that environment.
So you talk about that environment. I'll ask a broad question that you clearly be able to interpret. The scene was a lot different back then. There were a lot of factors at play. Were you ever so involved in the scene that you were part of all of that. So that's how you were
No,
able to
no,
lose
not
yourself
at
in the
all.
music.
No, I was, as I said, I was more a punter, a clubber than I was part of the scene. And
No, but
what I've
I mean,
never really
when
done
people
is
were in a club,
integrated.
people were in a club and they would be lost in the music for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
yeah,
Did you
yeah.
ever go down that route yourself?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I was there from beginning to end. I was in the middle of the floor, particularly in the ministry in the main room, because that for me was the best place to hear everything.
Hmm.
And it was central. I didn't want to be too close to one speaker because I was really fussy. I was like, right, now let me just try and find the right place, and I'm going to be here from beginning to end. And even going to the toilet was an annoyance for me
Hmm.
because I just wanted to be part of that journey,
So
to be there. And
you
some of the
understood.
DJs would.
You understood. I'm sorry, there's a crazy delay for some reason. So I don't intend to talk over you. You would understand how certain sounds would trigger something within the people, whatever state of mind they were in.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so you
totally,
still tap
totally.
into that.
Yeah, totally. That would always be the case. Absolutely. I'm always, for me, it's always as if I'm communicating with my previous self. When I'm composing, I'm going back to the 30 years ago, to the previous version of me and saying, right, here's something for you. Do you like it? And then it communicates back. I know it sounds crazy, but it's this kind of feedback loop, with my present self and my previous self.
Mhm. I hear you. Sorry, I was just inviting Mark Wilkinson along to join us. You talk about the early ministry days, one of the early residents. Good
And
morning,
and
Mark.
funnily enough, of course, I would have seen Mark out and about in those days, and it's amazing to see you again, Mark. How are you?
Good morning, guys. Yeah, so I had a last minute cancellation for a coaching call, and I saw Andy's post and went, oh yeah, I can come and join this."
We
So
used to
yeah,
speak a lot, didn't we, Mark? It's
yeah. So I
yeah,
just
I
wanted to come and say
remember.
hello. I'm here to observe and listen and support Andy and yourself, Danny. So crack on, chaps. But yeah,
Great. No, and I wanted to say, Mark, it's impressive with everything that you've built up. I said that to Andy earlier. This world that you've created is incredible. From what I can see, that seems like it's going to be really transformative for a lot of people.
well, I appreciate that, mate, and I'm not here to hijack anything. Of course, I was just coming to listen and support, but I really appreciate your words. And yeah, the book has done brilliantly, Life Remixed, and it's helping lots and lots of people. We've got thousands of copies out there and hundreds of coaching clients, and it's really
Yeah.
helping a lot of people, Danny. So I appreciate you
That's
noticing
great.
that.
I mean, it's a fantastic concept, because what you're doing is taking this whole kind of, you know, transformative, life-changing stuff, but bringing it into our world with the whole remix word, right? So that
Yeah,
makes it
exactly.
accessible for people from our side. I think it's great. It's really good. Well done.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm obviously looking forward to. I've got an interview myself with Andy on Monday. So
Great.
Thank you,
Good.
Mark. Thank
Enjoy.
you for joining us. Okay, Danny. So let's we got the roots of how you got into this, and then we got up to the point where your first interpretation, your first spend the night would have come out, which was the first time I would have heard of you. Um,
Yeah.
tell
Would
us
that have
about.
been there? So there was an EP, wasn't there? So there was the Stronghouse Fall to the Floor EP, which had the earliest incarnation of the track,
Mhm.
and that had three other tracks on it. But Spend the Night was the one that stood out, and I remember it kind of bubbling for a few years. I'd hear it all over the place, played in its original format by different DJs, so it kind of bubbled. And then what happened was, it got almost to the end, because in those days you'd sign a record deal for a particular period of time, maybe for a couple of years, maybe 3, maybe 10, it depends on the contract. So that contract was getting towards the end, and then they wanted to extend it as such. So they wanted to say, right, okay, we're going to put it out again, going to get some new mixes, and then we'll do a new contract. So that was kind of like a businessy kind of thing. And the one of the other mixes was the Danny Harrison mix, the H-Man dub, and that was the one with Julian Jonah playing bass. So there's another. I mean, Julian Jonah was one of the early. Was it Jealousy and Lies? Do you remember that? There was a track which was very almost like kind of Detroit, very much like Mr. Fingers or Larry Heard, and it was Julian Jonah, and it was a song or a track that he put together that I would listen way back. So I was actually really honoured that Julian Jonah was playing bass on this remix of my track, which is great. And Danny Harrison also was doing things like 187 Lockdown and various other things. So that was really great that mix came out. And what happened was when their mix came out, then it went from being this kind of underground bubbling sort of track to becoming something that started to get kind of almost commercial leanings, in terms of more mainstream reactions. And so what happened was then that it started building again. So it was kind of like two layers. You had the underground thing, but then it started getting into this more mainstream area, and Kiss started playing it more on the radio. And then what happened was, I think it was another 2-year contract. It got to the end of that contract, and then all of a sudden we were getting requests from labels, bigger labels, who wanted to put it out and take it to the charts. That was the idea. They spotted the potential. So lots of big advances were kind of thrown around, lots of really big names, and it was a case of trying to pick the right label for that particular track, trying to aim for something that was credible, that felt appropriate to the scene, and so we went with Locked On, which at the time was a subsidiary of XL, so it felt like it had the kind of the muscle from the larger company, but then the kind of more street level independence, that's what Locked On was offered. And actually Todd Edwards was quite instrumental in this whole process, really, because he did a compilation album, a mix session, which is called Locked On in the Mix or something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, so he Spend the Night on that mix. And so that was quite important as part of this journey as well. I've messaged Todd Edwards a couple of times about that, just to make sure that he's, part of that journey. He was one of the kind of stepping stones in a way. So it came out, and then of course, it sold a lot of copies when it came out on Locked On. And actually, from memory, it sold 26,000 copies on physical formats. Obviously there was no digital in those days. Well, yes, there's digital in terms of CDs, but it was CDs and records, and they ran out of copies. Right. So midweek we were at number 21 in the UK top 40. But then what happened was no more copies were available, which meant that we couldn't make any more sales, which meant couldn't go up the chart, went down. So I think it hit 29 in the top 40, UK top 40.
And what year would that have been then?
That would have been 98.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was championing the record from the very first mix.
Okay.
It was a huge Sunday night anthem for us in Birmingham. Just the raw energy of it, the birth of the UK sound before UK. I'm going to be doing a talk about that in a couple of weeks, but before UK garage was even a term, right?
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is that those of us, it's really quite clear, isn't it? You've got those. I was talking about being a London punter, watching lots of American DJs and producers, and they were my idols. So in a way, what's happened is London producers and other UK producers have attempted, done their best to try and make that sound. And there's something about the Americans, it was always the same with R&B as well, that the Americans often had that extra 10%. There was an extra layer of magic somehow that they managed to achieve that we couldn't really manage in the UK. So in some respects, the UK sound is an attempt at the American sound, but not quite there.
Okay.
But in that process, it becomes its own thing.
Well, I want to pause.
In that failure, it becomes its own thing. That's what I'm saying. So it kind of birthed its own audience. And I think that was those early stages. And, I mentioned when we'd finish up from the ministry and then go down the road to the Elephant and Castle pub, it's where the music was played faster. And it was just try to keep the energy levels up. They were spinning things a bit faster down there. And that's where it was the American sound, but almost morphed into a UK sound.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So people they were loving what the Americans were doing, but it needed that little extra. And then, of course, you've got the influences of the drum and bass scene, the throwback to the jungle scene, the rave, all of those sounds start coming in. Simon, if you just want to unmute yourself, do you agree is the wrong word to use, but do you I'll ask the question, do you agree with Danny that Americans do it better than us? Would you say, or is it perception? I can't hear you, brother. Sorry. For for some reason. I don't think your microphone's. You're not muted, but your voice isn't coming through. Have you got the right mic?
Hang on, can you hear me now?
I got you now. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. First up, what's up, Danny? What's up, guys?
Hey, Simon, how are you? Good to see
Yeah,
you.
good. Thank you, man. Pleasure to have you. You can't sell ice to ice. You can't sell ice to Eskimos.
Okay.
Should have been 100% agree with Danny. A lot of what he's saying now, I resonate too, because having that thing of being on the dance floor and then reinterpreting that back to yourself. I think that's what we all do in a strange way. I remember, there's a significant night. The first night you took me to Southport, and we stood in the middle of that powerhouse dance floor. And I remember you looking at me, and I was just frozen, just completely just glued. So yeah, 100% agree with Danny, 100%. And there is that thing about, training your ears, having your ears in a certain way that gives you that edge to interpret a sound and interpret a feel. I totally agree. Everything that Danny, I'm surprised you didn't see me nodding my head. It was nice to hear it from somewhere else.
I'm just trying to get used to this whole blue jeans thing. The way that the screens are working for me is a little bit counterintuitive, but that's by the by. Pat has joined us. Pat Beddoe. Good morning, Pat. I think is here. We'll come and say hello to you in a little while. And I am going to let anyone ask some questions to Danny. So it's the same story that we hear time and time again for people in the scene, Danny. And at some point, I think I would like to get a full interview with you. But what I'd like to do now is try and focus on the Spend the Night gave you the opportunity to then do more remixes, more releases, eventually beginning a label. So as we skip into the 2000s and the advent of the CD and the dubplate, the dubplate phenomenon within the UK garage sound, and things progress. Talk us through some of the advents in the technology that changed the scene that you saw, first of all, was a benefit and then became a hindrance.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just rewind very, very quickly to get to something that was really interesting. So I was telling you about the different engineers that I spent time with, and most of them wouldn't pass knowledge on, but I did start to learn through this guy, Darren Benjamin, who is known as Daz IQ, who is, Bugs in the Attic and so on. He and I became great friends. And so we got to know various different people, and there were lots of things that were being talked about. And one of the early things that was coming with digital was a thing called the Cerberus digital jukebox. We are going way back here, but the very first transmission of files digitally for the purpose of listening to something not on a CD, not on a tape, not on a record, by digital means was a thing called Cerberus. And so the rumblings of the change were occurring, I think, about 98 or so. So this company was setting up this new platform, and they were going around to different studios and telling everybody about it. And everyone was like, no, this is not going to happen, So there was always this resistance to the digital world from a very early stage. And there's no surprise really, because there was an entire industry which was based on the physical product. Physical product, not just the product itself, but the means of getting the product into the shops, the distribution of the product. So there was a huge industry built around this. So of course, what you don't want to happen is for people's jobs to be taken away, or for that industry to disappear. So there would always have been a resistance. So what happened was, what I've always done is there's only 1 year where I've attempted to do music full time, and it doesn't work for me, right? Because if I'm given all the time in the world to do something, I will take all the time in the world to do it, right? So having a free year to make music doesn't work for me. I work much better if I have condensed time, very specific times where I can go and focus and do so properly. So I only worked for 1 year as a full-time kind of music person. Every other year of my life has been, as an adult, has been working in jobs. So I've been working in jobs, right? And I've been lucky that a lot of those jobs have been very music and technology focused. If you're talking about the very beginnings of this digital world, in 1999, I was working for a startup company. So it was an internet startup company. And this was a platform for distribution of bands at the time. It was their music. So MP3s were a new thing. And so I worked in a company, and we built a platform for distribution of music. So it was as a band, you could send your CD in. We'd rip the CD, we'd put it on the servers, we'd make it available for people to listen to through streaming. And in those days, the streaming was really low quality. This was Real Player, right? It was very, very low bandwidth audio streams. But we built this mechanism for the bands to be able to then share a link and say, okay, here's our band page, here's our audio, go and have a listen. So it was a promotional tool for bands. They were all unsigned. That was the problem with the music platform. So from a consumption perspective, as consumers, there were no famous artists on there. There were just all these unknown bands. So in some respects, that was the thing that was the failure about the company, was that they didn't have the names that everybody wanted. But what we built as a company was some really impressive technology. And in fact, all of the songs were coming in through an A&R department. So you had 3 or 4 A&R guys that when the band sent in the CD, they would listen to every track on the CD. They'd fill out a card, and on the card it would have all the metadata. So the artist name, the title. They would work out the tempo, right? They'd work out the tempo. They'd be counting, using a calculator, getting the tempo, put the tempo in. They'd work out the musical key, put the musical key in there. They'd work out the start texture, the end texture, all of this on a card, a piece of paper. So they fill out all the metadata for every single song, that put into a database. And then we were generating algorithmic playlists in like 2000 or 2001
Wow.
that were working through all of this hand input metadata. So you would have mood-based playlists. And so it would create a sequenced flow of music from the data that had been put in. But the problem was it was unsigned, you know. So that was great. It was, you know, I was embedded at this company working with, you know, really great technology, very intelligent people. But what happened, I'll never forget this day. You know, we had an office in, is it Orange Street, around the back of Leicester Square. And it was 3 floors, about 80 staff in total, right? Because the city put loads of money into this company. So it was a really well-funded internet startup. And this is in the dot-com boom days. You know, you're talking about boo.com, lastminute.com, all of these companies that were formed in those early days. And there were, I remember going out from lunch, right, and coming back from lunch and noticing a really different atmosphere in the office. We had a fast network, right? So as a company, we were sending files all over the place, right? We had music files going back and forth. The majority of people at home had dial-up connections, you know, so you had a modem that used a phone and it used to screech to make the connection and so on, really slow. You couldn't download large files. So I came back, looked around, and there were loads of people at their computers with headphones on, with a screen that looked the same. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And it was Napster. And Napster had spread around the company like wildfire. All the staff were basically doing virtual trolley dashes in their Napster environment. And it was like, all of a sudden they were downloading all the albums that they'd ever wanted, downloading all the songs that they'd ever wanted, because they couldn't do it at home. You know, at home it was too slow. But here they were using the company's network to download all of this music. And at that minute, I thought, wait a second, here we are. This is a digital music company. And what's happening is everybody's just downloading stuff for free. And I thought, what happens if this starts happening elsewhere? And so I thought, I'm witnessing, in some respects, the death of the music industry, you know, firsthand, being right in the middle of it. And it was kind of ironic because we were trying to create a new way for people to benefit from technology,
without realizing the genies, the Pandora's box you're opening. If that's the right
absolutely. But the problem with the MP3 format was that it was very easily shareable, and these new peer-to-peer file sharing technologies were enabling that to happen at high volume, high scale. You know, so this was the turning point. And there's a really good book called Awakenings by a data analyst guy called Mark Mulligan. And if you want to get to this world, because I've lived through it, if you want to read up about this, his book is very good because it goes through that whole journey and everything that happened. And so it's Awakenings by Mark Mulligan. He works for a music consultancy. I think they're called Midia, MIDIA. So they do a lot of data analysis on the music industry. So he's been in this thing for a long time. So that happened, and then the MP3s created this wildfire. You know, it was just all of a sudden the music could be shared very, very easily. And then you started getting communities that would spring up that focused on specific genres, and we ended up in that world with a place called Soulseek and various others,
I was just
where
about to
people
say,
were
how
literally
long?
just sharing. It's
Sorry.
just a bit further down the line, yeah, a bit further down the line. But before that, the majors who had, built up a system where it was that business that I was talking about, your distribution, there were so many people who were needed to get the product to the street, right? So you have all of this industry, all of these jobs, all of this money that was made in a particular way before being threatened, and actually it was more than being threatened. It was actually impacted. The music industry was, for a period of time, really struggling because of piracy.
Well,
Everybody.
Mark has just made a comment in the chat. Thanks, Mark. I'm still getting used to this blue jeans. He said, I remember a label manager leaving the Ministry of Sound when MP3s were just starting so he could go into property. He said, no one has worked out how to download a house for free. True words there.
That is a very good quote. Yeah, absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
Napster thing, I was, in hindsight, I'm aware of Napster, but I never experienced it at the time. I was just about to say, when did the whole clampdown on Napster begin? Because I remember my earliest memories of the peer-to-peer networks are Soulseek, and I was, as guilty as anybody has been involved with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Napster was pretty much the coaster, the main focus, because it was all in the news, and that's the name that people would recognize. So the industry, the majors really attacked it, and it was lots of legal action and lots of, trying to stop this thing from happening. So in a way, it was the poster child of the whole kind of MP3 piracy world, but then other places kind of sprung up after. And actually, Napster does exist in a legal form now, so it's still around, but it's a legal entity, doing the same kind of thing that the other companies do, like Spotify and so on.
Cool.
But it's very interesting because what happened was that the music industry was shown, here is another way to do it. But it's just that the music industry wasn't the one that was doing it. That was the problem, right? So the other technology companies were able to do the things that the industry as a whole were not able to do. So we started to get into a world where the technology companies had more power, so that's where then the music industry started saying, right, we need to start investing now in technology. We need to start investing in expertise so that we can understand this world a lot better. So in essence, the industry had to catch up with the technology, and that did happen, So in a way, kind of fast forwarding, so you're talking about Soulseek and so on. My memories of things like Soulseek were the days of TrackSource was really interesting, because for me it was like the iTunes of the club world, So for our world particularly, it was a very, very well put together platform. I think Brian and the guys, really did a great job, and it was providing a legal way to buy the music and it's all curated and looked after really well. But your Soulseeks and stuff were a problem, And I remember, Andy, in the early days of when we used to communicate, groups that existed, like the Paul Farris group, and there were some others at the time, even the Defected Forum and so on. There were people there that would think nothing of going on Soulseek and downloading loads and loads of stuff, So it was almost like there were two sides. There were those that were the ones that would be honest and would buy stuff and try to keep true to the scene and support their favorite artists and so on. And then there were those that would just go, right, no, I'm just going to get what I want. Or others would just say, okay, here's a USB key with a whole load of stuff. Go and take as much as you want off there. So there was always this split. The reason why I think I'm talking about this is because the availability of the stuff, the freedom, the ability to get stuff really quickly and easily is the biggest attraction of piracy, right? But the problem is that often you would end up with stuff that you don't need. So someone would say, oh, here's a USB key with 1,000 tracks on it. Probably they would never ever play the 1,000 tracks, So what's the point in having all of that, So there was kind of wastage, even though they weren't doing anything with it. But the reason why the industry was able to turn around is because it capitalized on that fact. So a lot of people don't like Spotify for various reasons, but what Spotify did was they took the peer-to-peer file sharing world, the simplicity of that, the enabling of music to be put everywhere, And what they did was they made it easier to get the music than to have to go down the piracy route, right? And the piracy route was problematic because you'd have to go and get something, and maybe you download a whole load of tracks. Maybe the metadata was incorrect on the tracks. Maybe you didn't even have tracks. Maybe you downloaded something that had a virus on it. So piracy became dirty and uncomfortable. Yet the Spotify option became clean and comfortable, you know? So that's the difference between these kind of two worlds of technology, even though they're very similar. And the Spotify platform managed to pull in the big names, all of the major labels, you know, getting all of the famous acts that anybody wants to listen to. And the genius of what they did is that they made a lot of the music free to start off with, but then encourage you to pay. And so we now have, you know, 150 million, whatever it is, paying subscribers on Spotify that will pay $9.99, whatever it is a month, and they get unlimited access. So now, because of that, the industry has recovered, you know, compared to before, because piracy was taking away income, but now Spotify has brought the income back. But I am talking about this from the major perspective. Everybody knows that if you want to achieve any degree of financial success from Spotify, you need extremely high stream counts. You know, because of the way the royalty rate is calculated, you know, so you get a very small payment for every single play. Those of us who do not generate plays in the millions are not going to be generating significant income from Spotify. So I totally get it when people say they don't like Spotify because it's not enabling them to earn the money they would have earned back in the day when they were selling vinyl or selling CDs, you know, because a lot of people would put out a tune, you know, in the Spend the Night days. Let's just take, for example, the original Spend the Night. People would put out a few thousand copies of a record, right? And they'd sell them. And depending on the deal that they did with the record label, they would take probably a pretty decent cut, you know. So if you consider 5,000 times whatever that cut is, then that's much more than you'd get from the plays on Spotify. So I can totally understand why people struggle with, you know, the way that the mechanism has changed in terms of, you know, getting payments as such for what they do. So, you know, I totally get it. But what I will say is that Spotify and any of those other platforms like Apple Music and Amazon and Tidal and so on, they're really important because they have allowed the music industry to recover, you know, because it really did get decimated. And if you read that book by Mark Mulligan, it does go into great detail about all of this stuff. And also it shows you some of the battles as well that happened because, you know, the industry itself reacted really quite badly, I guess, to what happened with MP3s and so on. And maybe they could have taken a better approach. But all of that stuff is all detailed there. You know, the bottom line is that there are lots of benefits for the industry. And I've just seen a comment coming through from Danny Wood. It's flashed away, Andy. I'm not used to this Blue Jeans.
Yeah, I'm the same. Let me
either.
bring it up. So Mark started. Pugwash had said earlier, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
LimeWire was one of the other.
Oh yeah, that's it. I remember LimeWire.
Mark said multiple sources of income are required, however we do it. And then Danny says Spotify payments vary due to location of the stream. Prices for it in India or the Philippines are much cheaper than here. So the rate of return is also much smaller. No, with a question mark.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, as someone who makes the kind of music that I make, I think the best way to see Spotify is as monetized promotion. It's like radio to me, you know, so it does bring in some money, but you could never expect it to be your main income source. And, you know, Mark's talking about multiple revenue streams and so on. Yes, definitely. If you want to succeed in this world, you do need to do different things, right? And it's not just putting the music out there. Traditionally, yes, that's meant going and DJing. I'm not much of a person that has DJ'd and traveled around. That's not really been my thing. So I haven't had that. And that's why I've been doing day jobs. You know, I've been doing day jobs and making my music in the evening. Let me pause you there. You know?
Let me pause you there. We're going to come back to your day job. Before we do that, the beauty of the Saturday Morning Coffee Club is that we give everyone direct access to you. So before we hear any more from Danny, does anybody have any questions or any points they want to make on anything that he's brought up so far? I'll give you a couple of seconds to unmute yourself and ask possibly. If not, I'm not
I
sure
think
if
Steve's trying.
I'm not sure if Steve's. Are you trying to talk to us, Steve? Because you're muted. If you're driving, please don't focus on the car on the phone. Yeah, go on, Pat.
Okay, I joined a bit late, so apologies. Hello, Danny, and everyone on
Hello.
there. As we're talking about the state of the music industry from a historic point of view, I don't know if I've missed anything, but from a future point of view, Danny, where do you see it going? For me, I've always been the eternal optimist, which I am, and I figured that, you know, obviously I got into music just at the end of record sales. I've
Okay.
heard about it, and
Yeah.
obviously there was a lot of money flowing back then. And I'm always just like, even though it seems like the music industry's missed a trick, I personally think that they find a way to get back to monetizing it in a fair thing. Say about Spotify, I just wish they'd sort of like do some kind of percentage split that worked for the artists back then in this.
Yeah, I think what could happen is that potentially the royalty side of things might change. I mean, I don't know if you know about what's going on in the UK with the DCMS, but there's a government initiative as such to try to improve things in terms of the payments and so on. So there's a lot of political stuff around this, but you know, there could potentially be a benefit in terms of it may be that the money could be distributed better. I don't know. So that's something that's in progress. So if you're talking about specifically in terms of, you know, streaming royalties, there may be change in the future. We don't know. So yes, it may be that there could be a better split. I don't know, because I don't know the ins and outs, the workings of the companies that actually, like, for example, Spotify, all of their costs and their internal processes and how that works. So I don't know enough about that world, but potentially because of other activities going on, you may see that that will improve. But I think really what's happening is with technology is it's enabling people to think of new ways to generate income. You know, Andy, for example, myself, you know, we have YouTube channels, you know, so if you're putting out music, maybe you can find something else that you can do to hit your niche audience or your kind of world, and then maybe generate some income through advertising revenue. You know, that could be one thing. There are other platforms like Patreon, similar, where you can offer a unique connection to your fan base. And so what you can do is you can then say, okay, sign up. If you pay £5 a month, whatever, then I will give you content that I'm not giving to anybody else. You know, it's about building up that kind of loyalty with your people. You know, so that's one thing. Bandcamp, subscriptions. You know, I see Mark Cottrell does that. You know, so for his label, you pay £8 a month, you get all of the releases. You know, so there are lots of different mechanisms. And I think at the moment, you know, to be in that world and just to be in that world, then you've got to do lots of these things and see which one is the one that works with your audience and also with you, because there's a certain amount. I mean, Andy and I were talking about this before everybody joined. You know, I said to Andy, I said, you're having to do lots of different jobs here. You know, when it comes to streaming, if you watch a streaming event from one of the big companies, there'll be a team of people involved in the stream. Of course, you have your presenter who's behind the camera, but then the other side of the room, there'll be various people doing different jobs, you know, lighting, camera, stream person who's looking after the stream, IT person, making sure the bandwidth's all correct, all that kind of stuff. So it's lots of different jobs. And so if you're self-releasing and you're trying to make a decent income from it, you have to be lots of different people. You know, you have to take on lots of different roles. You become the social media marketer, you become the manager, you become the producer, you become if you're recording stuff and doing it, you become the vocal producer, you know, you become the engineer, the mastering engineer. There are so many things that everybody has to do. So it's difficult, but it can be done. And there are some people that are making a go of this. There's a guy, I don't know much about him other than that I know his music. There's a guy called Ross Couch who is putting out some really decent deep house music. His stream counts are really healthy. Go and look at his you know, recent, you know, everybody's been putting their cards up with all of their, you know, Spotify yearly wrapped thing, whatever it is. Yeah. And it's in the millions. You know, this is someone who's not.
And you know, Ross, he actually refuses. I've tried to book him for Vocal Booth over the last 6 or 7 years. He refuses to
Okay.
DJ. He doesn't DJ.
Yeah, so this is what's really interesting about him is that he's built up his following who are committed, and yet he doesn't appear, as far as I know, to be doing the octopus thing, lots of different jobs in different places. Yes, he does do the social media marketing side, and I think he does a good job of that because it works with his community. But he's not DJing, he's not doing appearances, he's not, so in a way, he's a really interesting example of success in the modern world. And it would be very interesting to have a session like this with him. I would love to join
Good
and
idea.
ask some questions
Good idea.
because he's quite a fascinating personality. But he does, I heard someone say consistently, he churns out tracks of high quality.
Every
Yeah.
month.
Hmm.
Every month for 3 years on his own label,
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the key. That's another thing. People will say, quality and consistency are really important, And I remember, Phil Asher, bless him. One of the things I remember him saying to me is you're only as good as your last track, And that's a really interesting point, that you want to make sure that you're putting out the best that you can. And try and avoid those moments where you just feel compelled to put something else out because you're supposed to put something else out. I don't know how he does it. He's just got so many.
Thank you for the
so many tracks.
recommendation. I will definitely reach out to him. I have a feeling he may decline. There's got to be a reason why he doesn't DJ. I'm sure there may be. I may be jumping to conclusions, but I will ask him. Consistency is key. A wise man once told me that repetition is mastery. I think that will fall into the same lines as that.
I do have
Okay.
a question, Ashton,
Okay.
if that's okay. On the flip side of that, Danny, what do you think what would happen, and why does it not happen that in terms of the royalty splits and the way that the shares are with these streaming services, what is the benefit to actually being a part of that as an artist? Because if the money's that bad, if the exposure isn't that good with 100,000 tracks plus per day being added,
Yeah.
why
and
has
it
there
is
not
that much?
been a
Yeah.
concerted effort for people then collectively to pull the music off and try and force a change? Why has that not happened? I've never understood that.
Well, I mean, you've seen the concept happen in terms of major artists doing it, right? Because Taylor Swift removed her music from streaming platforms. So if Taylor Swift can't do something about it, then I'm not sure what everybody else is going to be able to do about it. And yes, people could, but the reality is it's not going to make any dent in terms of financial performance of these companies if these smaller artists disappear, because unfortunately, just the same as it is with the rest of the world, and this applies to almost every aspect of the world. It's something like, I don't know, the top 10% makes 90% of the income. It's the same with, unfortunately, is this really unfortunate rule. It's not fair, is it? And it's the same with bankers and so on. It's just there is something here where some people are just better off, So I think the problem is if lots of people did remove themselves, it would not create a negative impact to the providers of those services, So I think that's the thing.
Pugwash makes a very good point. He says it's become part of the culture. And one of the things that I'm guilty of is always looking at things from the perspective of a 50-year-old's outlook. Thinking back to when I was 23, 24, 25, consuming so much of the music. What we forget is our generation now, we consume the music in a completely different way, and trying to expect the same culture that we had 25 years ago is a bit ludicrous, really. And it's a case of adapt or die. I believe it's a case of adapt or die. It would be the same as somebody back in the day, a ridiculous analogy, but a horse breeder complaining that cars were suddenly, taking horses off of the roads, and let's stop buying the cars and carry on breeding our horses. I don't know if that's a ridiculous analogy.
Difficult for those. I think it's difficult for those of us who were there before. And as I talked about this world where you could sell several thousand copies of a record and make some money, or you can go and do a remix and make a few £1,000s. There were all of these things that existed, and in the 90s, there was double packs of records, right? And you'd have maybe 8 different people remixing who'd all be paid a decent amount of money, because in those days, that's how it was structured. That doesn't happen anymore. you know. So it's a very different world. So it's difficult, you know. And you talk about the modern world. Spotify, even for some people, would be seen as an older thing. You know, the kids are listening to music on TikTok. You know, they're consuming music in different ways now. You know, youngsters, I think TikTok is probably a starting point for them in terms of discovery. You know, they'll find a song that they like because somebody's doing a dance or some kind of meme to it. And actually, there's a strong correlation between the successful tracks on TikTok and the successful tracks on Spotify, because it's kind of like that's where they find out about them, but then they go and listen to them ongoing in full on Spotify. But that in effect has also changed. But also that has changed the world of composition, in that if people want success on Spotify, they generally have to have shorter tracks and stuff that catches people's attention straight away. You know, so it's important, you know, the first 30 seconds generates the revenue. So if you go past the 30 seconds, then you make money. So it's that first 30 seconds, you've got to keep them hooked. You've got to keep somebody listening, because after 30 seconds, that's when it makes the money. So actually the concept of the music that we listen to, which has the long beats intros, that doesn't work so well. Although there are anomalies, there are some successful tracks that do have beat intros. But generally, you've got to get right in there. So for me, I've been making radio edits, and this is something that I spotted that Ross Couch did. So he was doing radio edits of all of his club tracks. And I think that's where you're getting your stream increases, because you're making sure it's kind of radio friendly in a way. You know, it's like, funny enough, I talked about the days at that internet company and the A&R guys. And one of those A&R guys used to say about every song, he always used to say, "Don't bore us, where's the chorus?" That was his catchline. So he was even thinking about, you know, catching people's attention early in those days, you know. And so from a radio perspective, actually, I mean, you know, Simon, you know, from radio, it's all about, you know, that impact in the early stages, keeping the listeners engaged, listening to the show. So actually, Spotify's just doing the same thing, right? It's if you want to keep people listening, keep them engaged. So it's like radio, really.
Like making income by doing radio edits with people. Maybe that's a stream I could do.
There you go. But well, the thing is, it's definitely a reflection
to a radio edit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just about to say, sorry, and I didn't know who was about to talk there, but I'll let you come in a sec. It's just a reflection. I'm sure somebody like Mark, who is very well versed on things like this, it's a reflection of society. I'm currently listening to an audiobook surrounding ADD, and it does talk about how society changes. It talks about how society is actually having an adverse effect on the development and the increase in ADD because of the way that it actually delivers content now, and it understands the population. You know, they have a shorter attention span.
You know what? I think it's a shorter attention span, but they're also so much more messages. I remember, I think it was about 7 or 8 years, we did an Ipsos research package for the radio station, and an interesting fact came out. We're exposed to almost 97,000 separate pieces of information every hour. So it may not be a case of ADD, it may just be a case of we've got more information out there, because everyone's got their smartphones, we've got access to different avenues of information. Think back to 20 years ago. We never had this much information to intake on a day. Never. Absolutely. It's insane. You know, even on a passive thing, you know, the amount of billboards that are out, the amount of advertising cards that are out. Think about it. There's a message pretty much on anything and everything nowadays, where it never used to be like that.
Yeah, and Andy, I do think that your this book that you're reading is onto something. You know, this whole idea that actually, because of modern ways of living, it's creating people who are experiencing symptoms of something that perhaps wouldn't have occurred in the past. Our world was much calmer and quieter. I mean, I remember, you know, the days before mobiles, you know, go to a club, meet someone, get a piece of paper, come back home the next day, give them a call from a phone box. You know, call someone. I thought you was going to say get a piece of paper and eat it. That's what I used to do. Yeah, something else.
Okay.
But, it's so different in those days. You know, for those of us, I mean, Andy is probably similar age to me. You know, it's like that's how it was back in those days. You know, it's calm, really relative calm, and also lack of information. We didn't have access to so much information that's available now, and all of these 90 odd thousand things that are going on that you're talking about, Simon. It's because there's so much more information. You know, so much more, and you're thinking a lot. You know, I watched a film. Nope, you know, the Jordan Peele film, right? I watched it last night. I've been waiting for some time. I thought I'll set aside some time to watch it. And my mind was reeling afterwards, you know. There's so much stuff going on. And I'd absorbed all of the stuff that I'd watched in the run up to watching the film. And then I see this and it's got me thinking. And it's just, I don't think I would have thought like that back in the day, you know. I would have gone to see a film and, well, okay, that's it, really. You know, there's just, somehow our brains, I think, are more active than they used to be, you know. And what does that mean? Is it going to create lots of people who have a certain condition? Is it, maybe it's going to be that the human race evolves and changes, you know, that we adapt, that maybe we improve, who knows? But I think it's difficult being a young person today. Absolutely. I think it's harder to be a young person because they got a lot of pressure from all of these social platforms. You know, I've got kids, you know, one of them's 14, and that age is the age when you are bombarded with all manner of stuff, you know, and they know much more than we did at 14 years than we knew at 14 years. You know, there's so much that they know about life. We used to, in a way, there was a protected set of layers. You know, you'd learn about some stuff in one age group, you'd learn about another set of stuff here, another set here. But what's happening is all of those groups are just dissolved, and here is everything. And that's quite daunting, you know. And they talk about, you know, there are lots of people considering suicide and all of these other really awful negative things. And perhaps it's symptomatic of all of this. Maybe people are being loaded with too much information, stuff that they can't cope with at such an early stage.
At a time when they're prepared mentally to be able to deal with it. It's a great point, but I think it's a deeper point, and we are here an hour into our conversation. Danny, you are fascinating. I could sit and listen to you for an age, and I am definitely going to bring you onto one of my separate streams. I think we covered about how you got into the music. I think we perfectly covered the development of the scene. There's still so much more that we can discuss at length.
Yeah,
but I'd like to start focusing on this current project because, you know, we want to give that a little bit of exposure just for the people that are here as well, because it was a great concept. And as you said, a few years ago, I'd put a mix together, you know, documenting the journey of a guy out on a night out and the series of events afterwards, taking him to an after party. And thank you so much for your kind words about my writing. I didn't realize you were so impressed by it, but it was very similar to your concept. So throw us into that then. Tell us about it.
Well, I tell you what happened with this. It was really quite interesting is that I don't know how much you've seen, but on Instagram, for example, I've been doing live streams for quite a while. And what I tend to do is I'll get the gear, I'll make something on the fly. So I come up with ideas on the fly, particularly using the Native Instruments machine, which is something that allows me to get ideas down quickly. So I ended up with a whole load of ideas, sketches in a way, that was sat on the machine on the memory card, and they were just left there, right? So they've just been building up. And I thought, right, I need to do something about this. So how can I get these ideas out and make them coherent, because they were so wildly varied. Like I'd be doing a live stream about R&B, and I'd be making up like a kind of almost like a what's her name, Jill Scott or a Erykah Badu kind of thing on the fly, just challenging myself and just seeing what I could do using the sound banks and so on. So I had all these weird sketches. Some of these were stuff that people would recognize from me, you know, kind of like the houseier stuff, but then others were different styles. And I thought, how on earth am I going to get this all to make sense, you know? So I thought, can I think of a concept? I don't know, maybe people going on a journey, going through a club, checking out different rooms and all this kind of stuff. And I looked at the styles. I thought, okay, the majority of these are quite relaxed, deep house kind of tracks. So that would probably be getting ready to go out. And then someone goes out, they're in a club, and then they go to different rooms, go to the R&B room, go to the reggae room, and so on. So that was my kind of way of bringing this all together. And I thought, what if this becomes like two people that meet, and then that becomes something that can become the thread. And then because the styles went through so many different kind of flavors, and one of them became almost like melancholy and sad, I thought, right, let's have it so they get on, it's all hype, but then all of a sudden something happens, and then this whole thing ends. So through the fact that I was weaving this story, putting the tracks together, working out the track order, all of these other things that you do when you're trying to put something together, it grew into something through that whole process. So I ended up with something that then, when I was looking at the gaps, I found, okay, so I could definitely compose something deliberately to fill those gaps. So it's this organic process that started with random sketches that then needed some sense of a narrative, that then became more of a narrative because of filling in the gaps, and then starting to believe in that journey, because I've listened to this thing over and over again. What I tend to do as a writer is listen to my stuff a lot, so I do things like go to sleep with it on the earphones. It's just repetition over and over again allows me to then subconsciously, in a way, start to see where the gaps are. So this whole process was over a period of time, 2 years probably, if you think about the early stages. So this hasn't been put together in a short period of time. It's something that has been bubbling around because of all of those sketches and ideas. It just needed reining in and a theme. And then that also coincided with the advent of AI becoming more mainstream. And you look at the artwork that's been generated by AI. Even if you read some of the press information, the bio, the stuff that I've written, that's been generated through an AI. So there is a theme that not everybody knows, is that actually this is also a very contemporary use of technology. So I've been using ChatGPT. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's an open AI product. It's kind of like Google on steroids. So what you can do is you can ask it a question and it will give you an answer. But I could ask it a question. I can say, right, write me a press release about a music album, 16 tracks long, mainly deep house, but with a bit of reggae, bit of this and that, and R&B, and the story is about a couple that meet and blah blah blah, and it gives you in 3 seconds its interpretation of what you've put in, but incredibly well written.
Okay, so let me pause you there. I was conscious of this us talking for too long. I don't care, because I've got lots of answers. I got lots of questions here. So pause where you are. This current whole furore on Facebook about the Lensa use of the Lensa app. Everyone's saying about it's putting artists, it's putting these people out of work. Isn't that what you? And clearly, I'm not attacking you. I'm applauding you, but that's basically what you're doing. You're putting a publicist out of work.
I totally get it. And if you imagine, let's just say, I'm going to tell you now that this technology right now is accelerating, right? Its capability is almost doubling with each iteration. So we're talking about it's just going to change everything, right? It will change everything. We are going to see in the next few years all of this stuff get more powerful. And then by 2030, I don't think people will be working in conventional jobs anymore, right? My prediction is that people won't have jobs because they won't exist. And that there will be a means of allowing people to live comfortably. People have been trialing the universal basic income thing around the world. And this is something that could exist. People would live. They would be able to live happily and comfortably, but it would have to be a big redistribution of all of the money and everything. Because you think about it, the amount of things that are being replaced by automation at the moment, right? And that's, you go into your Tesco, you're doing stuff using a till that you scan through yourself. Stuff's being reduced everywhere. When you consider this kind of technology and the power of it, it's even writing code, So I work with, people who are, their job is to write code or to create, to take data and analyze it and produce results. a lot of this stuff can be done by the technology in its primitive state right now. But if you see it over the next 5 years, that will become much more powerful. So someone who's writing code at the moment, a developer, a web developer, for example, the code can write the code, if you see what I mean. So the AI can generate the code. At the moment, there are lots of people that are doing the testing of this product and they're very technical, and they're putting information in and they're getting stuff coming back. And what it could be is you say, okay, write me some code to take this data and transform it and then present it like this. And then what will happen is that they'll put in their code and say, validate my code, and then the AI will go in and pick out the areas where it could be improved and then suggest those improvements. All of that stuff's happening now. If you're into, I don't know, anything really, to be honest, anything.
So
Put
are
something
we
in there, see what comes back.
are we so resistant to it because we grew up with Skynet and we grew up with the Terminator, the idea of that, the negative future?
I don't know. I'm not. I've never have been. I've always embraced new technology. So I'm always trying to see where the opportunities lie. For me, I work with people who are involved in this world, and we see it as a co-pilot. It's like a wingman. So it's, I shouldn't say wingman, wing person. So it's a co-pilot, somebody who is with us to assist us, which means that we can then free up our time to do other things that are more important. There are some things that lots of people do that are repetitive, that they don't really want to do, but they have to do because it's part of the job. Here is something that can be used to remove the repetitive, annoying things and place the focus elsewhere. I think ultimately these products will need a trainer, a mentor in a way. There's always going to be somebody required on the human side to manage and, in a way, plate spin and encourage these AIs, right? So that will be a role that a human will need. But actually, in that process, there are lots of roles that won't be needed anymore. So in the future, technology will replace people. The art side is frustrating because as a creative, we've always felt that we would be needed in the future. If you think about it, you think, oh no, the bank jobs don't need those anymore. Anything that's kind of requiring a human to do repetitive tasks, you don't need those. Even solicitors, you won't need solicitors and stuff like that in the future. The AIs will look through the historic precedents and then look at the other court cases, look at the ways that other solicitors have interacted with cases before in the future, and then offer the right approach interactively as people go through. So lots of things will be replaced.
That
But
sounds like Minority Report. That's scary.
Yeah. But but the thing is it will change. And yes, for us, we're from a different time, so we struggle with some of that, and I think the younger generations coming up, that's what they'll just be used to. My parents used to say, oh God, I hate today, like youth of today, all of these new things, don't like these new things, don't like the new technologies. In some respects, it's that whole cycle is coming back, and I'm so connected with technology and kind of like always have been, through all of the different decades of my life, that it's part of my life, and that's because of
where I
the day
struggle
job.
with it, I don't disagree with it, but humans are flawed, which fundamentally for me, and I have this discussion with myself quite often, is that because humans are flawed, then there's a possibility that the AI could be flawed too as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we are flawed, and also it's all dependent on the information that's placed in there. So there could be bias of some form, and at the moment, everybody's trying to expose the bias of this particular chatbot. So that is currently something people are trying to do. They're trying to get to its kind of its core, its soul as such, and understand where it leans politically, where it is on race issues, and all of these other things. So that's, people are challenging it at the moment, and as a company that's responsible for that technology, they have responsibilities to make sure that it's neutral. It has to be. And so that's one of the reasons why they're putting it out at the moment as a beta, is to allow people to test it, and then they feed back to the company, and they're trying to make this thing whole. But what's happening is this AI is starting to understand millions of people. It's becoming this incredible source of knowledge, and that's where the danger is. They have to be very careful, because that could be abused. That knowledge could be abused. It's almost like it's absorbing the thoughts. It's the same as Google, right? Google has always understood us because we've put all of our search queries in. So it starts to understand what people think and what they want to know. This is on a much bigger scale. So this particular engine is one probably of several, but at the moment it's getting the attention. and it's incredible. It can write a song. I can say, right, write me a song about Andy Ward, who's a DJ from Birmingham. He'll come out with a great song. I was doing this at a work event. We had a Christmas party. I was just saying to people, right, okay, tell me what you want the song to be about. Let's do it. And it writes a song, and it writes it with humor, with intelligence, with lyrics that are rhyming. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Wow, deep. Okay, so again, another conversation for another time. Let's get back to the album then.
Yeah. And by the way, sorry, Andy, I'm going to have to stop at past. But
no worries, that's all good. I understand. So
so the album. I mean, for the artwork, for example, what I wanted to do was I just wanted to create a scene. I put in some prompts, and I said, can't remember what it was, something like a woman standing at a window at night time, New York, a few prompts. And then what happened was I came back with lots of different things, and none of them were perfect. And then one of them came back that was about 90% of the way there. It had this weird kind of artifact at the top right. So what I did was I went into Photoshop, and then I just got rid of that. And then I ended up with what I feel is something that I feel very connected with. It definitely works for me for the album, for the theme. But it was generated by an AI artist. And one of the things as a self-releasing music maker is I do need to keep all the costs down, because the return isn't enough for any investment going out. That's why I master everything myself. I can't afford to do mastering, given the amount of money that comes back from the music. So having to pay an artist is not something I would usually have the luxury to do. So having an AI do it for me means that I can have something that's a bit better than the usual art that I've had. I did pay a graphic designer to do my logo, and I paid a graphic designer to do the original layouts, but then that template, they gave it to me, and I worked with that template ongoing, so that was an investment, but I couldn't afford to do more than that given what's coming back. You
can't justify it. So tell us the name of the album. It's available to purchase now exclusively on Traxsource.
It's called Night Tales, and at the moment the extended versions are exclusive to Traxsource. Right, it's the only place where you're going to find them. So if you want to DJ the tracks, Traxsource is the place to do it. But for everybody else who wants the kind of complete story as such, that's on streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music and so on. And they're shorter tracks, and they're deliberately shorter tracks because I didn't want to have 6-minute, 5-minute tracks on an album for the streaming platforms. So it's two distinct releases. One is for DJs, one is for just listening. And the combined duration of the album is about 42 minutes, I think. So it's not a long album, and it's a funny one. I've put it on and I've left it, but I generally, Andy, the funny thing with me is I make music for me, right? So I make music that I want to listen to, and it's not even a narcissistic thing. It's just that I know what I like, and I make stuff for me to listen to. And it was embarrassing, really. We get Spotify Wrapped. Most of my top 3, I think, were my music, because I've genuinely listened to my music because I like it. So this album, I put it together for me to listen to. I've listened to it over and over again, and I really enjoy listening to it as an experience. And this morning I've had Nick Standen messaging me from his holiday, and he's going, I've just listened to this completely. I love it. It's great background thing. All I want, really, I just hope that people will do the same thing. They'll just put it on, and for me, it's kind of just like relaxed. It's a vibe. It's like a nighttime vibe. You put it on, and it does go through this journey, and it can be background. I'm very happy for it to be background music. That's pretty much what I intended.
Well, I was very happy. I was very happy to reach out to you after you sent it to me because, as you know, we've spoke on many occasions. You are still very gracious in sending me updated works from time to time. And I said, Danny, I'm not really playing out, but I like these tracks you've sent me in the past. And I purposely didn't reply until I'd listened to it all. And I came back to you, I said, I love this concept. It's really great. I love the whole idea of it. I love what it's about. A lot of respect for you as well. So, and you coming back to saying about it's not narcissistic. I think there has to be some level of self-preservation in the fact that you make this music for yourself, regardless of how it's received, because otherwise you can send yourself crazy, especially in this day and age.
I agree. Yes. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because you do need, it's almost like if you appreciate it, that's somebody who is appreciating it.
Definitely.
And
So
you do need
we've got a
some
few
return on
minutes
that.
before we're going to wrap up. Like I say, Danny, I am going to schedule a full interview with you because it's
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating, and your depth of knowledge. We haven't even started to talk about your
I
your
could talk
teaching
for
and everything.
literally
You
for
know.
hours. Yeah, I could.
Any questions for Danny before we allow him to go, guys? No, I
Just from
think
me,
everyone's
just
just
from
been,
me. Thank you. Just,
yeah.
just be love always. Always love watching his Instagram posts on that machine.
Yeah. I mean, now you see how they can be used. And then what I did was I exported everything as audio, Simon. So it's for me, the way that I got those ideas out was that let me just get them all as audio files, and then we bring those through into Ableton, and then we try and make some sense of them. And for me, there is a magic in that process, and I think I'm going to use that ongoing, because I think I've got a bit bored of just going to Ableton and starting in Ableton. There's something about the physicality, and this is the old school thing again, isn't it? It's like having something with some flashing lights and bashing it around. There's a little bit of a magic in there. So I think that's my ongoing process now. Get the ideas in machine, export as audio, go and arrange them, and just kind of get that thing happening quickly instead of procrastinating on these things for too long, just knocking them out, getting them done. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, definitely, I think Simon and Pat will definitely relate to that. Right, I am going to allow you to crack on with your Saturday morning, and a little later on, I'll send you a message and we'll coordinate something in the new year for a proper conversation.
Great, and thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for joining us, guys.
Mate. Thank you for your knowledge, Danny. I will say to anyone because this has been recorded, it's going up on YouTube. If you've made it this far, there's no need for me to apologise for the haphazard nature of how I've been recording it. You're still here. You've got something from it. I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you all, guys, for joining us, all the crew inside. I'm just literally going to end this now. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Ben. Pat's, Pugs, Emily. I'm not sure if there's anyone else in the background as well. I'm just going to cut it and say thank you. Respect.
All right. Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.